And now we're on Daf Chof Hey Omid Beis. Rabbi Akiva Omer, he has a different opinion. Who are these people? Mishal the Eltzafan Hayu. These were cousins of Nadav Avihu. You remember that on the very day of the great dedication of the Mishkan, Nadav Avihu brought what's called in the Torah Eish Zorah, whatever that means. There's 7 different possibilities. Anyway, the fire came down and burnt, they died. And there were 2 cousins of theirs who were dedicated to burying them. They were Mishael and Eltzafon. Rabbi Yitzchak has a third opinion. He says, one second, Im nose arono shel Yosef for hayu yecholim lihitoye. Now let's understand that Klal Yisrael, when they came out of Mitzrayim, they encamped for a period of over a year in one particular location. And that means that no one was carrying the coffin of Yosef. It was left stationary in one particular machna. So how can you tell me that those who were in charge of Nosei Arono Shel Yosef, what Tmeim, for the Korban Pesach, the first Korban Pesach was brought in year number 2. By that time, they certainly would have brought the Mechatos. Now, the Mechatos would have come at the beginning of Chodesh Nisan, which would give you 14 days to make the transition from Tumah to Tara. And in Mishal Vel Tzafon Hayu, Yecholim Hayu Litar. The same is true with regard to Mishal Vel Tzafon, because they buried Nadav Avihu again on the 1st of Nisan, the day of Chanukas HaMishkan. There's a full 14 days until Erev Pesach, when they brought the Korban Pesach. They too would have had ample time to be mitayar themselves. And the Mefarshim spend a lot of time here trying to defend Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva, because those 2 shittas identify the Anoshim who are Tmeim as those who certainly could have undergone a process of Tara way in time for the Korban Pesach. Ella, but rather, this is Rabbi Yitzchak's third opinion. Who are these Anoshim Chashuvim? Oskim b'meis mitzvah hay. There was a certain case, or more than one case, of a corpse that wasn't being buried. No one was there to bury the mess. And a number of individuals who were great people, they came forward and they, at great sacrifice to themselves, knowing that they wouldn't be able to bring the Korban Pesach, they volunteered to bury a mes mitzvah. They contracted tumah in that within that last week before the Korban Pesach was brought. Shechal shvi shalem lios b'erev Pesach. You can work it out that the 7th day since they contracted tumah's mes and they buried a mes mitzvah was actually on Erev Pesach. Now the law is that Mechatos requires Hazah b'shlishi b'shvi on the 3rd day and the 7th day. So now they cannot become par until after the Hazah of the 7th day, when the sun sets at the end of the 7th day. That's already too late to bring the Korban Pesach. Shenemar lo yochlu lasos haPesach bayom hahu. Why does the Torah add these 2 words bayom hahu? That they weren't able to bring the Pesach on that day. Bayom hahu einam yecholim lasos. So lemachar yecholim lasos. If only the Korban Pesach could have been brought on the 1st day of Yontif, meaning not Erev Yontif, but on the 15th of Nisan, they would have been fine, because then they would have had the Azah b'shlishi b'shvi, and once they went into the 8th day, meaning in this case the 15th of Nisan, they would have been tahorit. L'macha yicholim lasos. So we see very, very clearly that within that period of time of 7 days before Pesach, they were involved in burying the dead, and that precludes them by virtue of the fact that they are tmeim from bringing the Pesach Sheni. Now, what happens here? We have a choice between two mitzvahs, and they clash one with the other. This is what's called Ef Shalakayim Shnei. Why? Because if 7 days before Erev Pesach they'll involve themselves in burying the dead, then they won't be able to bring the Korban Pesach. And the Torah says that these Anoshim Chashuvim were absolutely correct in what they did, and they chose mitzvah A, in this case, to bury the dead, over mitzvah B to bring the Korban Pesach. They came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, Lama Nigara, why should we be excluded from the Korban Pesach? After all, we're good guys, we're involved in the mitzvah, and you yourself asking for us that we have to involve ourselves in the mitzvah. But you see that they were part of the Pesach, I'm talking about Pesach Rishon, because of Osek B'mitzvah, because they were involved in a mitzvah. So why then did the Brisa need the parsha of Kriyat Shema, in order to derive the conclusion, the principle of Osek B'mitzvah, part of mitzvah? Don't stretch your arm out to your dear, because and Belecha, I don't need all that. The very fact that they were involved in one mitzvah before the Korban Pesach and not involved in Korban Pesach, that itself indicates that Osek B'mitzvah, part of a mitzvah, tzricha. The Gemara says we need both. If we only had the case of Pesach Sheni, Mishum Delo Motas Man Chiyuva de Pesach. You know why we're going to allow them to bury the dead? Because there is no conflict right now. Now it's true, we know, we can anticipate that a week down the line they'll be excluded from the Korban Pesach because of Tumas Mes. But right now, when they encounter the corpse that has to be buried, there is no chiyuv of Korban Pesach. And this, by the way, is a very important breakthrough in the Gemara, because there are many situations where a person can put himself in a situation where, when down the line he'll be chayiv in a mitzvah, he won't be able to be makayim in the mitzvah. So let's say, for example, I wanted to take a trip to, to Cyprus, right? I'm going to go to Lubavitch in Cyprus. I don't know if you know the rabbi, he's a gadol. Anyway, so he's going to go to Cyprus, and he's going to miss the mitzvah aliyah l'regel. You could say, I'm okay, because right now it's not yontif here. I don't have to make all the calculations that what I do today will exempt me and make it impossible for me to do a mitzvah later. But here in the case of Kriyat Shema, the Motas Man Kriyat Shema, he's right now obligated to the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, but he's on his way to his Rebbe. Aim alone. Maybe in such a case, we don't have any exemption. He should interrupt his mitzvah of going to his Rebbe, and he should recite Kriyat Shema. Now we have to the other way around. If we only had it in the case of Kriyat Shema, we should do like a kares. Okay, the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema is an important mitzvah, but you're not chayiv kares if you don't recite Kriyat Shema. Man, that would be pretty scary. If anyone missed Kriyat Shema, he gets kares for it. Somebody in the case of Korban Pesach, this is one of two mitzvahs. Out of all the mitzvahs, the Ramach Esed, which is, how many other Shasai essays, right, which you get kares if you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Aim low, I might think that that in this case, we're not going to exempt him from the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. That's too heavy and strict of a mitzvah. It's a kares. Kufa. We go back to the statement of Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta Marav. How do we know that since the Torah, the Tanakh, in this case Yechezkel, calls Pe'er Tefillin, therefore an Ovel is exempt from Tefillin? You should wear your Pe'er, and Pe'er is Tefillin. Atu de mechayves. You're chayav as the exception to the rule. The Torah says that Yechezkel, even though he will be an Ovel, nevertheless he should not fulfill the mitzvah of Havelus. Here I have a note on the bottom he says that this was all part of a nevuah that Klal Yisrael would go out to Golus, and many of the members of Klal Yisrael never would be killed, and this is going to happen also in Eretz Yisrael. Many people will die. And because of the tragedies, one on top of the other, they won't be able to prava avelus. They won't be able to be noig avelus. So that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yechezkel, I want you to live out. What's the word I'm looking for? I want you to demonstrate in your own life that there won't be a chance of avelus after the churban, after the exile, after the goals. In any event, he was obligated to put on tefillin. Aval kuli alma, anyone else in that situation who is an avel is exempt from tefillin. Not only exempt from tefillin, but he's not allowed to wear tefillin. Animili b'yom richon. Only the first day of his avelus. The Torah says v'achrisa ki yom mar. There's a pasuk in Tanakh, in Sefer Amos, and he says that first day is a Yom Mar. And Yom Mar means that there's no possibility of Pe'er. Pe'er and Marirus are mutually exclusive. So the Navi here is telling Klal Yisrael that Hashem is going to make them into Avelim. Rahman al-Islam. They'll be grieving mourners. That's going to be on a bitter day. The most bitter day is the first day of Avelus. Yom Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda Omar Rav Ovel Chayev b'Sukkah. Wait a minute, you just finished telling me that Ovel is Chayev in all mitzvahs with the exception of Tefillin. Why do you feel it necessary to tell me this Chayev in Sukkah? Why would Sukkah be different than Tzitzis or Tefillah or any other mitzvah he's obligated in Pshita? Ma'od I would have thought, oh, Yom Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda Omar Rav. If a person is distressed by sitting in the sukkah, he is exempt from the mitzvah of sukkah. Hai nami, and here to the ovel is mitztayru. He's also in a state of anguish. A mashmalon, no. You're misunderstanding it. There's no absolute rule that mitztayr is potem in a sukkah. But hanimili mitzara de memela. Tzara de memela means a tsar that's caused by the sukkah. Let's say, for example, you have mosquitoes in the sukkah. If your house doesn't have mosquitoes, then you're allowed to stay in the house. But if there are mosquitoes in your house and in the sukkah, so what difference does it make? That's not mitzvah in a sukkah. So it's got to be a mitzvah because you're in the sukkah. Now, in the case of an ovel, does the fact that he goes into the house, is that going to remove his distress? Is his distress being generated or caused by the sukkah itself? When the tsar is somehow in the sukkah itself, and you could alleviate that distress by going into the house, then you're part of it. He himself is in a state of tsar. It's inherent in the person. It's not inherent or caused by the sukkah. So let's differentiate between two fundamentally different categories of tsar. There's tsar haba machmas yeshiva b'sukkah, and then there's a tsar denafshe, tsar because he himself is in a state of tsar. So a person has a headache. If you're going to tell me there's no difference between suffering from your headache in the house or in the sukkah, then he's obligated in the house. If a person is mitzvah benafshe because he lost one of his close relatives, then what difference does it make whether he's in the sukkah or he's in the house? And that's what I thought was pshat in the Gemara until I saw the next few words. You have those words in your Gemara? I didn't invent them. What's he boilele yisuve daita? Tell me these chayiv in the midst of sukkah. Literally translating, boilele yisuve daita, he has to remove his state of anguish and sit in the sukkah. Why do you have to? Why are you telling me that? I mean, you're telling me that he's mitzvah, and he's not mitzvah machmas sukkah, but rather it's mitzvah nafshe. So tell me he's chayiv in sukkah. The sukkah is not causing his distress. So I heard once from I didn't hear it directly, but I heard in the name of Soloveitchik that he said that this Gemara is establishing a separate mitzvah of an oven. Fabulous. It has tremendous repercussions that an ovel is chayav b'yisuve daita. That is included in the mitzvah of avelus. And it's really yisuve daita. He has to fight off his grief. He has to calm himself down from his distress in order to perform a mitzvah. And this is lav dafka b'sukkah. Any mitzvah that he has to perform. He puts on his tzitzis. He's got to overcome his distress. And Rav Soloveitchik used to say that an Avil is chayiv in mitzvahs more than anyone else. That's why an Avil will recite Kaddish. Why does an Avil recite Kaddish? Anyone can recite Kaddish. But the answer is he's got to demonstrate through Yisuve Daite that his Avelus does not undermine his ability to perform mitzvahs. Because if it does, then he's missing a chunk of Avelus. Avelus means to accept the righteousness of God. That's called Tziduk. Not only is the Chasan himself parted from Sukkah, but even Shushvinan are his relative or his close friend. And then his Bnei Chuppah means back in the day, I don't think we have this so much today, but there used to be an entourage, a whole group of people that would accompany the Chassan, for 7 days. And they're also part of Sukkah. My timer, why? They are obligated in a very unique, specific way to rejoice and bring joy to the Chassan and the Kala. And by the way, I don't think it's the Kala is less important here than the Chassan, although the Rambam's language seems to indicate that the mitzvah is to be Sameach Chassan. But Pashtus, it's Simchas Chassan V'Kala. So they're involved in being Sameach Chassan V'Kala. Where's the Chassan? He's in the Sukkah. So the Bnei Chuppah, the Shushvina, they also have to be in the Sukkah in order to be Sameach Chassan. By the way, you know that in Chabad there's a minhag that in Shmini Atzeres, in Chutz La'aretz, or what we call Simchas Torah, you don't sit in the sukkah. And it's based on Kabbalah, but the Bali Kabbalah think that Shmini Atzeres has the Bechin of Chasam V'Kal. It's the ultimate yichud with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore we have to go out of the sukkah, because the Simcha of Chasam V'Kal takes us out of the sukkah. Anyway. So the Gemara asks, "Lechlu b'sukkah v'lichtu b'sukkah." Why can't they be misamech the chasam v'kala in the sukkah? And the answer is, "Ein simcha ella b'chuppah." There's a specific place where the chasan is for 7 days. That's called a chuppah. We think of chuppah as the place under the canopy where he marries his wife, but that's not so. Chuppah really means the place where for 7 days the Chasam Kala are involved in Simcha, and they're outside the Sukkah, and therefore those who are obligated, the Shushvina, to be Mesameach Chasam Kala, they also have to be outside the Sukkah. The Gemara asks, V'lechlu b'sukkah, v'lichdu b'chuppah. Why not eat in the Sukkah and then go out of the Sukkah into the Chuppah where they have to be Mesameach Chasam Kala? And the Gemara answers, Ein Simcha el b'makom suda. That you have to integrate the Suda itself together with the Chuppah and the Simcha of the Chuppah. So therefore you can't have a Suda in one place and the Simcha of Chuppah in another place. And since the Simcha of the Chuppah forces us to leave the Sukkah, we can't eat the Suda inside the sukkah because the suda itself is an integral part of the simcha. The Gemara is still not happy with this. Really, avdu chuppah b'sukkah. Why can't they make the entire chuppah in the sukkah? What is it about the sukkah that is antithetical? It's like a anti-gravitational force of simcha. You can't have simcha in the sukkah. Last Sukkot, we had the pleasure of hosting an entire group of yeshiva students. My son-in-law is involved in this group of students from yeshiva called Taras Chaim, and they all came to our sukkah. I can't begin to tell you what the simcha was like. But the Gemara says, "Abaye omer mishum yichud." The chassan wants to be alone with his wife. I mean, he just got married. He doesn't want to have a simcha in a sukkah where, it's a public area. He wants to be able to go into the house and he'll find a chamber in the back of the house where he takes his wife. Rav Amar mishum tsar chassan. And Rava says that it's really uncomfortable to be in the sukkah. They didn't have a sukkah that was, today people boast of their sukkah. They bring everything into the sukkah. But in those days, it wasn't so. Anyway, tsar chassan. Now take a look at Rashi, 4 lines up before the end of the Rashi says, "V'makom tsar upasuach she'ein lo ela sholosh defanos ubosh l'sachek im kalos." So Rashi has a different take on tsar dechasim. I thought tsar dechasim means, how can you be in a state of simcha and enjoy the comfort of a house when you're in a sukkah? But Rashi says no. The problem is that the sukkah only has 3 defanos, and it's absolutely open in the 4th wing, the 4th direction. So he can't do private things with his new wife. So now let's go back to Abaye. Abaye says mishum yichud. So I said that yichud means that the chassan and the kala want to be alone. No, that's Rav. Abaye is talking about yichud, that when the chassan goes out of the sukkah, let's say he goes to daven or wherever he goes, then other people are coming into the sukkah, the shushvinon and so forth, and that's going to be a violation of the Isur Yichud, because the sukkah itself is a very private area. So the Gemara says, "My beinayu." Let me just try to guess my answer to beinayu. What would be if you have a sukkah that has 4 defanos? Most of our sukkahs today have 4 defanos. Back in the day, it was common to have 3. Now, according to Abaye, we have a serious yichud problem. On the contrary, if you have 4 defanos, it makes the problem even more severe. But according to Rava, that he wants privacy in the sukkah, then if it's closed on the 4th side, because Rashi says that the tsar dechasan is because ein lo ela shalosh defanos, so he'll have to put a do not disturb sign, out of his sukkah. Ika beinayu the shlichi inshi the nafki v'ayli lahasam. So it's common for people to go inside the sukkah. Let's say the sukkah is in a sort of a major courtyard and people coming in and out. There's no problem of yichud if the sukkah is open to the public. You know that here in Yerushalayim, in Kikar Safra, have you ever gone on sukkahs? They always have one, like the winning sukkah of Yerushalayim. It's fascinating to go. But that's a public area. You'd never have an issue of yichud in such a sukkah. But Lamani Yom Mishum Tsar de Chassan, that's the last place where the chassan wants to be with his kala, as Rashi says, l'sachek im kalasam. He's embarrassed to do anything in public. Therefore, in such a case, there would be a disqualification of the sukkah. And therefore, he's potter min sukkah. Omer Abzera, ana achli b'sukkah v'chadi b'chuppah. I was able to eat in the sukkah And the celebration took place in the chuppah. Chuppah, as we said before, is the place where the chassid kala designate for the 7 days. And I had even more rejoicing because on the one hand I fulfilled the mitzvah of Sukkah, and on the other hand the simchas chassid kala took place in the chuppah, the kavidna tarte. I have to write 2 mitzvahs, not just one. I got the mitzvah of Sukkah and I got the mitzvah of Simcha. We learned to the Brisa. Chasan v'ashishvina v'chol b'nei achupa p'turim min atfila u'min atfilin v'chayavim b'kriyat shema. So the entire entourage and all those relatives and friends who are going to join the chassid kala for that week, and they're going to be misamech them, they are potem min atfila u'min asukah. But yet, minat tefillin, minat tefillah, but yet they chayav in kriyat shema. And apparently, what's going on here is, remember we quoted the Ran at the beginning of the Shia that if you can juggle 2 mitzvahs without forfeiting the first mitzvah, then you're obligated the second mitzvah. We don't apply the principle of osek mitzvah to the mitzvah. So even though the chassan and sheshvinin are very involved in being mesameach the chassid kala, they can take that minute break and recite kriyat shema without undermining the mitzvah of simchas chassid kala. But if we're going to send them to davening, the tefillah, that's a very involved mitzvah, and they won't be able to give due time to the chassid kala. Now, alternatively, there's another way of learning this brisa, and that is that we're not talking about osek b'mitzvah potem in a mitzvah, but rather we're talking about the inability to do justice to another mitzvah because you're tarud in the mitzvah of simchas chassid kala. You are preoccupied in being misameach the chassid kala, and you are so preoccupied that you can't daven. You can't put the focus and the attention on your davening. Davening requires kavanah, and tefillin also requires a certain nikius, a certain purity of thought. Because the Chazal compared the tefillin to the tzitz on the head of the fire of the Kohen Gadol. So your preoccupation with being a sameach the chassid kala makes it impossible for you to do justice to the mitzvah of tefillah or tefillin. But you can take a break for the mitzvah of kriyat shema. And finally, finishing up here on Daf Chavav Amud Aleph on the top of the Amud, Mishum Rabbi Shela Amru, Chasan Patur. The chasan is parted from kriyat shema. In that sense, Rabbi Shilo accepts the opinion of the Tanakama, and he only argues against the Tanakama with regard to tefillin and tefillah. Right? The Tanakama said, Minat tefillin u'minat tefillah, and he's saying that chasan is patur from kriyat shema. One second. Give me 1 minute here to clear my head. Again, according to Tanakama, Potter from Shiloh. What does Rav Shiloh say? The Rashi says, "B'kriyat shema the Torah, Sharbanei kupachayav v'lesluhu lahani tanoi ha'osek b'mitzvah potter min ha'mitzvah." So he's not applying the principle of osek b'mitzvah potter min ha'mitzvah, and the chassid is potter from kriyat shema because he can't focus on kriyat shema. It's nothing to do with osek b'mitzvah. What's the nafkamina here between Rabbi Shilo and the Tanakh?
They are high.
Right, that could be what.
says, vicious me. Oh,
Oh, so it works like this. So Rabbi Shilo is not operating, Rashi says, with Osek mitzvah, potem mitzvah, right? Let's see the second line in Rashi again. The leslahu lahani tanon. He doesn't accept the principle of the other tanon, namely that Osek mitzvah, potem mitzvah. So he's only learning, Rashi says, tirda. Do you see that? The top line of the page in Rashi. The Torah. So that's the only ptur. And that's going to only apply to the chasan, because the Shushvina and the Bnei Achupah are not in the getter of Tarud. And even though they might be in the getter of Osik b'mitzvah potem mitzvah, Reb Shilo didn't accept the principle of a Osik b'mitzvah potem. Okay, then Reb Osik, that's where we're going to stop for today, and we'll leave it tomorrow.